Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a Lovecraftian, Charles Coulombe.
Lovecraftian?
Yeah,
As in the work of H.P. Lovecraft?
absolutely.
The Dunwich Horror, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Thing on the Doorstep? That H.P. I'm Lovecraftian?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Am I Lovecraftian in the sense that I'm a strange being from the great outside? One of the old ones, like, oh, golly, like great Cthulhu himself, or Dagon, or Azathoth, the blind idiot god gibbering at the center of reality. Am I like that? Or am I like one of his hapless heroes, beset by forces from beyond that he can barely deal with, and that overwhelmed, or at least threaten to overwhelm, not just him and his personal sanity, but everything about him? Which is it?
The
Am I like
the
the
latter,
latter?
for sure, yeah.
So now I begin to understand. So I'm like Dr. Armitage in the Dunwich Horror.
Not familiar, but sure.
Okay, or like the narrator in The Shadow over Innsmouth. Okay, well, actually, I can't really argue with that one too much, because the whole world has gotten rather Lovecraftian.
Exactly. And your motto, while referring to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, is inherently Lovecraftian. Stay sane inside insanity.
Well, that's very true, despite the fact that his heroes, more often than not, don't. They usually, not always, but they usually don't manage to do that. Generally, they kind of snap, or they're snapped in 2 or 3 or several other pieces. Yeah. Well, it is a very Lovecraftian world we inhabit. I think it's because Lovecraft's mindset was so much ahead of his time. Because, he, although surrounded by believers of every stripe, he himself was an atheist and a rationalist. He loved old things. His tastes were very conservative. But he was a very forward-thinking, rationalist sort of man. And so his heroes are confronted by a meaningless universe wherein man means less than nothing. And that, of course, is the kind of universe our society has created for us today.
Yeah, your one of your recent Facebook posts reminded me of it. We've got churches without religion, media without truth, universities without education.
Yeah. It all becomes pointless and meaningless. So, like a good Lovecraftian hero set firmly in the 1920s, 1930s, the most we could do is dress well and attempt to resist the insanity around us by pretending not to notice.
Yeah, we've got everything for a Lovecraftian novel. We're missing one thing.
What's that?
We're missing Cthulhu himself, but he's got enough time to
Ah,
jump in for the election, doesn't he?
well, that's the thing, Cthulhu in 2020. Why vote for the lesser evil?
I love that. I love that. Yeah, you have a picture? You have a meme of that, I think.
Yeah, I
Somewhere.
do. It's you bet. Well, similarly, years ago, you remember the Campus Crusade for Christ had as their motto, "I found it." That was their motto. It meaning the truth. So this is again back in the '60s. Some Lovecraftian fans came up with the Campus Crusade for Cthulhu. It found me. And left out the other part, which was "and dragged me screaming out of my hidey hole."
Wow.
No, it's true. That is not dead which doth but sleeping lie, and with strange eons even death may die. And we certainly live in strange eons, ladies and gentlemen. In his house at Rilia, great Cthulhu lies sleeping. Yep. In the face of all that, the characters that populate the stage right now are amateurs, awaiting the great octopoidal-like thing to come up and take charge of them.
So anything new?
Oh, man, oh Manischewitz is their new stuff. Where do I begin? Justin Bieber Trudeau, the childlike premier of Canada.
I'm sick of hearing about this already. Okay, go
Oh,
on,
don't.
Charles.
I think it's wonderful. The revolution eats its children. And Monsieur Trudeau, who's really only about an eighth French Canadian, I want to make that clear. The only thing French about him is his name. He's half Margaret. What's that?
That's not a strike against him in my book.
It isn't mine. He's 3/4 moron and 1/4 French Canadian, but he has an extraordinary problem right now because he's always been Mr. Sensitivity, Mr. Everything to Everyone, and now it turns out that at least 3 times and possibly more he appeared in black and/or brown face. Very insensitive, very upsetting, etc., ad nauseam. Well, when questioned about it, he said that at the time, and I love this because he skillfully shifted himself into the victim seat. He said, he didn't realize how much hurt it would bring because he was wrapped in layers of privilege. Oh, the poor dear. My heavens. Poor little Justin was wrapped in layers of privilege. Oh, what a poor fellow. I feel so sorry for him. If it's that big a deal, he should rip off those layers of privilege and redistribute them.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can help him with that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it would be harder for you than me. But yeah, we sure can. We really need him to give up those layers of privilege, move out of Sussex Drive, resign the prime ministry, and get a real job, perhaps as a day laborer.
You said he skillfully did this. I don't see any. I don't think anyone's going to pity him.
Oh, but he sounded like he expected pity. Poor little Justin.
You think?
I want to see him in front of the Walmart with the other day laborers for hire. And if he wants, because he's shown he's adept in it, wants to fit in, he can, brown up while he's doing it.
Brown up?
Yeah. Well, he did it before. And he'd want to fit in with the other day laborers being hired,
Yeah.
Yeah, what is it? No, it's not a Walmart. It's the Office Depot. With the big American flag flying on there on Huntington Drive.
That closed down.
Well, he could still stand there.
Okay.
Probably harder to get hired.
It's Home Depot.
Home Depot, yeah.
Yeah.
Home Depot, yeah. He could with the big flag. He could stand there with the other folks waiting to be hired.
Yeah.
You'd let Justin Trudeau work on the Tumbler House Tower Gardens, wouldn't you?
No.
No. Why? Because he's only a quarter French Canadian. That's it.
Yeah, because he's a quarter French Canadian. I wouldn't trust him.
Yeah, he's only a quarter. Those 3/4 will get you every time. You're right.
Yeah. No, it's that 1/4 will get you every time. No.
Talk about switching. Oh golly, poor little Justin. Well, apart from that, there's not a great deal to say. Today is the 20th of September that we're in real time, which is the anniversary of the fall of Papal Rome in 1870 and the death of a number of Papal Zouaves at the breach of the Porta Pia and the Roman walls. As you know, I wrote a book on the Papal Zouaves called The Pope's Legion, which you sell.
Right, we only have one autographed copy left. So,
gosh, well, yeah. Till Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, that's only that one. So the first one who orders it gets it. And then when I come home at Christmas, I'm sure I'll sign up a bunch more. But it's an amazing story. So please remember the souls of the dead Papal Zouaves in your prayers I'm sure they'd appreciate it. The other thing I should mention is that I have it on reliable authority. And again, this is perhaps because I'm Lovecraftian, and perhaps because we're getting closer and closer to Halloween. Everyone's going to see this on the autumn equinox, autumnal equinox. But I understand that the 13th floor is appearing in the elevator more and more often.
Is that
sort of a seasonal event.
Is that a concern to you?
Well, no, not while I'm in Austria, it's not. It might become a concern to me when I come back there next. I mean, I understand Tyrone doesn't go on the elevator at all right now. And when he doesn't go on the elevator, it's because he knows the 13th floor might be there.
Yeah, well, that's his one weakness. Tyrone has
Do you
one
see
weakness. Yeah, what?
Have you seen the 13th floor on your various up and down on the elevator ring?
I don't like to look.
Very sound, very sound.
No.
You don't even know what you've got in there, do you?
I'm
You
just
own
checking
this
my
bloody tower.
messages. I'm just, I'm busy with other things when I'm in the elevator. I'm never just idle.
So let me get this straight. You own this bloody tower, and you're not the slightest bit curious as to what the 13th floor is, why it seems to flash in and out of existence, what strange things might inhabit it. You really have no care at all.
Well, it's this sort of, if it is true, I think it's some of those things that can become an obsession. The demons and things of this nature, they like that. They like people to be infatuated with this, and I'm not going to play their game.
I see. So you're just going to get in the elevator, and until you're on the 15th floor, make sure you're checking your messages. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And I have my scapular on. I have my miraculous medal on. I'm good.
And it doesn't matter what other people encounter. Okay, that's fine.
Well, you can think of it as a tool for getting more people to wear scapulars and miraculous medals. Puts a fear of God into them, doesn't it?
Well, that's true, and that's the other thing I'm told. I haven't seen it because, of course, I've been here since August. But I am told by my oh golly, you know who I'm talking about. Oh, the old guy with the broom, Ben. Ben Benjamino. He told me that you've got this little well, like almost. You remember how they had the ashtrays on stands? We've got a box like that filled with cheap scapulars,
Yeah,
right by the elevator.
That's right. See, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. When life gives you the 13th floor, encourage scapular devotion. You see?
It all makes sense if you squint.
Yeah.
Well, other than your personnel issues, what have you got going on?
Nothing. Same old. Business as usual. I'm still making the sacrifices with my meals. For the people. I'm just living the spiritual life. You know what I mean?
Well, out of curiosity, today being Friday, did it occur to you? And it's an Ember Day today. Yes, Ember Days in Michaelmastide. Yes.
So
Today, well, prayer and fasting. Did it occur to you that this would be a great time to sample the mackerel in the commissary? Yeah. A little bit of penance there for the big guy. Yeah, a little bit of that good mackerel.
Charles, if you know anything about spirituality, if you've at all well read, then you've read Introduction to Spiritual Life by Francis Sales. And if you read that, you would know that he tells you that each person has their own form of devotion. Okay? And just because you do one thing doesn't mean that everyone has to do your thing. Okay.
Well, no. Otherwise,
I guess you wouldn't know that. I guess you wouldn't know that.
Gobbling lobster.
Look.
But here it is. You could mortify yourself by lifting the delicious mackerel to your lips, knowing that it was mature, well aged.
Okay, wait. Well, we might as well get this out of the way. We have a meme to show everybody.
All right.
So
This is
I'm
one
gonna
of the
put it
memes
up
of
on the
production.
stream. Yeah,
Is this a meme of production?
This is a meme of production. Unfortunately, it's one of our big fans from Aaron. I'm going to put it up on the screen right now. Picture of me. And supposedly I'm saying, well, the mackerel is a week old when the commissary, ... Wait, are we live?
Caught out. Hoist upon thine own petard.
That's, I can't tell you how hurt and disappointed I am that a fan of the show would make a meme that is in this poor taste. It's libel.
Libel?
And he'll be lucky if he makes it through the day without hearing from our lawyers, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I don't think you should worry too much because truth is the best defense, especially in libel cases. Remember, you would have to prove that he was wrong. You would have to, in front of the court, you would have to prove that this wasn't true.
It's not going to make. I tell you what. Well, that's true.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. What are you going to tell me? Precisely right. So you see, unless you can prove that he's telling a falsehood, he is in the clear. So I would not resort, even your lawyers can't pull one over on this sort of a deal. That's why libel cases are so hard in our country. They're easy in England where it's the other way around. In England, he would have to prove that this was in fact the case. But in the United States, you have to prove that it isn't. And I would think now, and mind you, if I was subpoenaed and I were brought up in front of a judge with the DA wanting to know all, well, I could not perjure myself, and I know you of all people wouldn't want me to. So I'm thinking that legal recourse is probably not the way forward for you in this particular matter.
Wouldn't I just have to testify that that's a lie, that I never actually said that?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I'm not entirely sure that I could testify to that under oath. I'd want to. I would really want to.
Okay.
And you know what they say? Wanting to is as good as actually doing it.
You know what's sad?
What's that?
You know what's really sad about all of this, about Aaron and about you, is
what?
That we have a world-class kitchen.
Yes, I know.
Our kitchen employees are responsible for the food, and you haven't even referred to them as existing or as people. You just complain every day about the food. You don't even care about their feelings. I wonder if you even know the chef's name.
I do.
What's his name?
Schwartz. Oswald Schwartz. See? You thought I didn't know.
Okay, fine.
And I knew something was up with him when I asked him where he was trained, and he said the Cordon Bleu. And I said, what? He said the Cordon Bleu. I said, could you say that one more time? And he looked at me and said, what do you want? It's the Cordon Bleu. And I said, so how long was it done bleu? And he said, about 12 minutes. The Corps had done blue. That's what he told me. And I have to admit, he is high quality. He said, I've got 5 stars. And I said, from Michelin? He said, no, right here. There were 5 gold stars that, he had on his collar.
Okay. Well, in the words of one of my favorite executives, Don Draper, if you don't like the if you don't like what's being said, change the conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and change the conversation right now. And
okay.
Let's someone is very special from Nicholas.
I'd
like to preface my question with an encouragement for viewers to contribute monetarily to the channel. I joined the executive board for many reasons, some of which are nepotism, corruption, and the 5-star buffet, but also because this channel is an important tool for evangelization. So many shows, videos, and radio programs aimed at evangelization are soft and emotionally driven. Catholics and non-Catholics need solid discussions on real topics like history and the church. I believe this channel is desperately needed, and I invite any here listening to join me at the executive table. Now my question: when did apologetics and evangelization move to the familiar wishy-washy feelings-based approach we have today? Christian radio stations with positive music and the like. Has this Christianity without the cross ever shown fruit? Let me jump in before you get started, Charles.
Okay.
And let me just say something. Now, Nicholas, here's a man that gets it. Okay? Here's a man.
Yeah, he gets it now that he's on the executive board.
Here's a man that is fully on board with the mission of Tumblr House. I cannot overstate how important the 5-star buffet is for evangelization. Okay, so I just want to thank Nicholas for the question. Thank you, Nicholas. Finally, someone who gets it.
Yeah, well, okay. Let me address the other half of his assertion.
Go ahead.
Which is that despite the manners and habits of the Tumblr Towers executive board, despite all that, thank you very much. I mean, all joking aside, just for the moment, and I know some people have expressed a difficulty in knowing when we're joking. Well, what can I tell you, ladies and gentlemen? My late father used to say that there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who say there are two kinds of people, and those, well, that was one thing he would say. But he would also say there are two kinds of people in the world: those who get the joke and those who are the joke. So make sure you get it, don't be it, as opposed to what the Rocky Horror Picture said. Anyway, no, we try to, in with and under the levity and jollity, we do try to give you as solid stuff as we can for precisely the reasons you outline. People just aren't, It's easy either to be hysterical about everything, or to pretend everything's fine. It's easy to be totally intellectual or totally emotional. But life isn't like that, ladies and gentlemen. And the faith, being the ultimate reality, if we're to lead real lives, our lives have to reflect that, which means intellect and emotion. It means an awareness of the horrors and the nastiness, but also the joys and the wonders. These are all true at the same time, ladies and gentlemen. And we can't ever let our experience of one aspect of the situation we face obscure the rest, because then we're just not seeing reality as it is. It's very, very important. What was the question again, please?
Has this wishy-washy feelings-based approach ever shown fruit? Christianity without the cross?
Well, I guess you could say that the beginnings of it are really with the Reformation because of the idea of private judgment. Now, mind you, that was not true of the first Protestants, who all, in various ways, very much fans of hard things. Sometimes, like with Calvin, out of all proportion to reality. But nevertheless, it was backblast specifically to Calvin, which began this phase of Christianity without the cross. And of course, I'm referring to Unitarianism. In the United States and in Europe, in the course of the 19th century, more and more people began to look for various kinds of Christianity without the cross. Catholicism was by and large untouched by this until the aftermath of the World Wars and Vatican II. And then we also began to join a lot of our Protestant brethren in trying to avoid the cross. But it's interesting that many of those who deny the cross most vociferously for themselves tend to impose it on others de facto. I'm in charge, worm boy, you're not. There's no one who is more authoritarian than a clerical purveyor of Christianity without the cross. They tend to be very dismissive of God's claims while very, very sensitive to their own. So,
Okay. I mean, to me, things aren't in order when you have that approach. You're not recognizing the sorrowful mysteries, and without the sorrowful mysteries, the glorious mysteries also can't be put in their rightful place either.
or the joyful.
Or the joyful. Everything's out of order. Everything's mixed up.
And in truth, I mean, we're called on to keep an extraordinary balance between the cross and the crown, the crucifixion and the resurrection. We can never lose sight of either. But today, because they lose sight of the one, they lose sight of both. And you have, I mean, someone like Karl Rahner, who made the unintentionally ridiculous, but certainly somewhat blasphemous statement that if they found the bones of Christ in the Syrian desert, it would not disturb his faith one iota.
What?
Well, yes. Well, St. Paul tells us that if Christ be not risen, our faith is in vain. So the question is, what was Rahner's faith in? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, similarly, there was an abbot, a Cistercian abbot in the Abbey of Haute-Rive in Switzerland, who many decades ago, in the wake of the Vatican Council, when people asked him what he thought about what the Pope was doing at that time, that Pope then, he said, "I would believe whatever the Pope told me, even if if he said there was no God." Well, you see, this is what comes of taking a small piece of something and taking it out of all proportion to everything else. Papal supremacy is important, but it's not all there is. The crucifixion is important, but it's not all there is. The resurrection is important, but it's not all there. Everything has to be kept in line with everything else. And as soon as you stop doing that, you get really cray-cray. Religion is the worst possible place for this. Recently I wrote a piece for the Catholic Herald on this former Jesuit, Joseph Murphy, who became a minister of the Church of Divine Science, which was sort of a new thought healing kind of thing. Well, there's a certain amount of truth to what he was saying. That is to say that healing can certainly be brought about through prayer and focusing on God and all that kind of thing. But that's a small part of the entirety of religion, and he made it the whole. And he threw over his priesthood and the sacraments and everything else for that. Um, what can you say?
Nothing. Just sort of there and have your jaw agape for a while. I'm still shocked at that Rahner statement.
Yeah.
I don't know how this. I don't know how that man has any positive reputation even in liberal circles. That's shocking
Well,
to me.
because he had a great bit of patter. He says at one point in his Theological Investigations volume on the Church that at times one has an obligation to differ from the teachings of the Church. What? Huh?
That's like saying sometimes one has the obligation to differ from reality.
Well, indeed. Sometimes one must abandon reality in terms of one's own fantasy.
So he's saying that the dogma of the Catholic Church aren't reality.
Pretty
That's
much.
like an admission right there that this
That's
is.
really what he's saying. That's really what he was saying. You remember Brother and Mary's Church of Salvation, yeah?
Yeah, the book. Yeah,
Did you ever read it?
I browsed. It's got a lot of quotes. Got a lot of helpful quotes.
Forget the quotes. Well, I don't forget them, but read the section on Karl Rahner. It is absolutely essential. I mean, if you want to understand Karl Rahner, you've got to read Church of Salvation.
I don't like reading bad things. I want only good thoughts. There's too
Yeah,
much.
me
There's so
too.
much bad in this world. I'm just gonna zone out and watch John Wayne movies. Feel good.
You remember my friend who used to do that
Yeah,
and sit there and drink
exactly.
his
And
beer.
that's perfectly legitimate to me. I mean, that's a great one.
You and me can join him on the couch.
Absolutely.
Just sit there drinking, watching old John Wayne films. Well, you know, I mean, gosh, only John Wayne could stand up to Cthulhu.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, you know, we got some of our viewers excited with the idea of Karl Rahner and Talata Chaudet at the Battle of Los Angeles fighting off the UFOs. So what's wrong with John Wayne and the Sons of Katie Elder doing or dying with Cthulhu? John Wayne will have the whole posse with him, you know.
Oh man.
Well, now it's like this, Pilgrim. We're going to hunt down this gigantic octopoidal thing and put paint to it once and for all. We're not going to have any more of these great old ones coming in from outer space. We're going to blow them sky high. Who's with me?
Oh my.
So, tell me, Running Feather, where do you think Cthulhu's gone to? Cthulhu, 12 miles this way. Mount up, gang. We're going to go deal with the big octopus. And off they rode. Now, that's if they were a posse. Maybe they're a detachment of cavalry from Fort Apache.
Has gosh, I consider myself a John Wayne aficionado, but I don't ever recall him employing an Indian.
He didn't. But,
Yeah.
you know, he needs all the help he can get to deal with this thing.
Okay, the ends justify the means on this one.
Well, they do. Also, I feel for racial diversity, we needed to add a Native American to the plot.
Got it. Yeah, good idea. I like that.
Yeah, well, run it up the flagpole, see if the money salutes. You know, this takes it a step beyond Cowboys versus Aliens.
It's an actual movie. That's a Harrison Ford movie. I didn't watch
It is.
it, but yeah.
I saw it. But we take it a step forward. Cowboys versus Cthulhu. Starring John Wayne.
You know, that would sell. Like that.
Oh,
That would be
gosh.
like. I mean, you get a decent cast in there. You get like. Oh man, yeah, that could be really good.
I can see it now. You know, Jimmy Stewart arrives by stagecoach, clutching the Necronomicon. You know, well, you see, I was a professor at Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts. And this here book, well, it's the story of Cthulhu and his evil minions. Well, say there, Pilgrim. I don't know if that's a wise idea, dragging a book like that all the way across the continent. Oh, well, you've got to understand this. It's the only thing that could save us against him. I don't know. I put a lot of faith in my six gun, old Betsy here. Yeah, I can see it.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's basically the dynamic in The Man Who Shot Liberty
Valance.
Yeah.
That's right, with Cthulhu in place of Liberty Valance.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
I can see it now. When old Cthulhu would eat the town, the men would run and hide. they'd hide. Yes, I can see it now. But the man who shot great Cthulhu, he shot great Cthulhu. He was the bravest of them all.
Wow, what a mixture.
Not only do they not make movies like that anymore, they never made them before.
Wow. All right, let's.
The question is, does he do this only with a posse, or does he bring a detachment of cavalry from Fort Apache?
That's the question right there. That's $1 million question.
It's a huge question. And that's not all. Does Andy Devine come with him?
Oh my goodness, Andy Devine.
See, these are the kinds of questions America wants to know.
I would say, if it was my vote, I would say yes. Go ahead. Bring on Andy Devine.
Oh, well, you know, that Cthulhu has more than eight tentacles. I don't know how many it has. I saw them just raging all around. It was awful. And how far outside of town did you say he was? Oh, I saw him. I don't know. It must have been about 10 miles out of town. Yes.
Okay, that Andy Devine put it over the top.
We've jumped the shark, haven't we? So I can see it now, though. Andy Devine sees Cthulhu outside the town.
No, Andy Devine was in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, too.
He sure was. See? The only thing we have to do is change the villain from Liberty Valance to Cthulhu. It's gonna, and then at the very end, the fellow on the train can say to the agent Jimmy Stewart, he can say, "Nothing's too good for the man who shot great Cthulhu." Yeah,
there it is. Wow. Okay. Let's jump to the next question before we delve too deep into madness here.
All right, what do we got?
Wow. Okay. Next question is from Covington. Are there any popular misconceptions about pre-revolutionary France and the causes of the French Revolution?
Gosh, where do I begin? Are there any non-misconceptions going around?
Okay.
Yeah, that it was oppressive. I mean, what does that mean? Did they kill infants? No. Did they destroy marriage? No. Oh, sorry, that's another country. I guess ours. No, I mean, pre-revolutionary France definitely had some problems, and they were primarily financial, brought about by some problems with structure. But the biggest problem pre-revolutionary France had was that it had gone bankrupt, intervening in the American Revolution. Because in 1788, when there was a big volcano in Iceland and the crops failed as a result, whereas in normal times, either the royal granaries would have been opened or they would have borrowed money to buy grain to feed the starving people, there was no money and no credit because they'd blown it all on the revolution. And the result was the Great Hunger. So the question was how to raise money to deal with this issue. And that was why the king called the Estates General. And that, in turn, led to the beginning of the revolution. What people forget is that Louis XVI had already begun a lot of reforms. The problem was that going to war kind of stymied them. Now, they'd gone far enough that France was able to defeat Britain. France had fought a series of wars with Britain and her allies. The War of the Grand Alliance in the 1680s, the War of Spanish Succession in the 17-teens, the War of Austrian Succession in the 1740s, the 7 Years' War in the 1750s. In every single one of these, while the French might outgeneral and out, because the French system was not put together in such a way that they could get money out of everyone the way the British could. So they'd always run out of cash. Well, Louis XVI's reforms, beginning with his accession in 1774, bore fruit so early as 4 years later, when the beginning of their intervention in the revolution, in that they were able to fight another war and not run out of dough. They did go bankrupt, however, and maybe if the war had lasted a bit longer, they'd have lost. But with the French, the Spanish, the Dutch in on the war, the fighting against the Americans, and on top of it, the threat of the League of Armed Neutrality, which was virtually every other country in Europe coming to the war against Britain, they threw in the towel. Now, of course, it didn't help that the early part of the war had been sort of thrown by General Howe, which kind of, complicated things. Had Howe done his job, the revolution would have ended in 1776. But he didn't want to do it, and so he didn't, and so there it is. But had the French stayed out of it, I have no doubt that Louis XVI's reforms would eventually have come to fruition, which would have been a much more sturdy foundation for finance of the state in general. But, and one of the great things about history is that we're never given to know what might have happened, only what did. I would recommend, though, for those interested in the French Revolution and its prequel, I would recommend a book called Louis XVI or the End of a World by a French writer named Bernard Fay, F-A-Y.
Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake," right?
No, she never ever said that. That was made up. Interestingly enough, Jane Seymour, the actress who played Marie Antoinette in a movie, she did the research for her role. And I remember reading an interview with her how miffed she was that that line turned out not to be true. She really got annoyed that something so monstrous should have been attributed to her. Because you know how it is. I mean, if you're an actor, you're getting ready to play a role, you try to really know the character,
Right.
which was not the case here, but even if you don't like the character, you try to present them on their own terms.
Right. You don't judge your character, as they say.
No, you do your best to depict them as they were, within your abilities. And so when she found that out, she was very, very much annoyed that this had been done. But, what you gonna do?
Okay. Next question is from Waylon. What sources does Charles recommend for United States, international, and church news?
Well, Asia News, put together by some of the national
Did you say
bishops'
Asian?
conferences. Asia, ASIA.
Okay.
It's an Asian Catholic publication. It's online. The Church News Agency, not to be confused with the Church News Service, is very good. The Catholic Herald, of course.
Catholic News Agency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Not the Catholic News Service, but the Catholic News Agency.
Got it.
The Catholic Herald, of course. Crisis Magazine. I write for it, so it must be good. The Wanderer, the Dear Old Wanderer, the Remnant, Peter 1-5, if you really want to get excited.
At least get the name right, Charles.
Whatever. Peter 5-1. You know it better than I do. LifeSite News, Church Militant, Rorate Caeli. And don't be afraid to look at Commonweal in America. Don't be afraid to look at Crux News. And these are all slanted, but you need to know the other side as well. U.S. Catholic is a little too strange for me, I'm afraid. Oh, the National Catholic Register is very good.
What about the Babylon Bee?
The Babylon Bee, like the Eye of the Tiber, unfortunately, tend to get stories before they've actually happened, but then they do.
Yeah.
That's the sad part. That's why I had to get out of comedy myself. It was simply because my worst jokes kept becoming the truth. Um, I did like the Babylon Bees headline that you sent me about the fellow totally being ready to overthrow the government, except that he'd have to get out of his house and get dressed, which I think does reflect a large portion of us and how we really feel about these things.
That's dead on. Love that. We were talking about this pre-show. You have some difficulty. So that's church news, but you have some difficulty when it comes to more political and world news.
Yeah, I mean everything is so agenda driven these days. Um, you know, you either have to hate or love the Trumpster. I mean, and the publication or the news outlet that you consult is going to try to push you one or the other way.
Yeah, it's funny the way I receive it. It's sort of I just let stuff trickle down, and I sort of receive it through comments on the thing itself. Like the Bieber thing. Like I actually haven't read anything on the stupid Bieber thing. I just read, what people say about it on Twitter and stuff, and that's how I receive it.
Well, I don't know. It's the other thing too is that it's so ridiculous and so silly.
Well, so much is though. It's like it's
Yeah,
not
I
just
know.
that. It's
I know well, it's Lovecraftian is what it is. We live in this strange, weird twilight that.
I mean, every single thing the Pasadena Star News. You just pick up the paper every day. I just whenever I'm getting my morning coffee, I'm looking at the headline, and it's even the most innocuous thing. I forgot, like Trump appointed some member of the bureaucracy, and I guess it was innocuous enough, but they had to add fourth in 2 years, as in like he's been recycling them all the time. He's just left and right. I mean, there's always some little thing where he can't do the smallest thing right.
No, I know there was one of these things. The LA Times, you remember this? I got him to kind of fit over it
Yeah,
on the show.
where you found out that they criticized him for doing one thing, but they got it wrong, and he ended up doing the other thing. And so then
it was signing the proclamation for a holiday, which
Armistice Day, or no, arms. It was something with war. Some nuclear.
Defense Day or something.
Yeah.
I forget. Loyalty. No, it was Loyalty Day.
Yeah.
And it attacked him for renewing this Cold War tradition. But then it turned out that Obama had done it.
Yeah.
So then they backtracked, and then they attacked him for not doing it. Except that he had. I mean, it was the most pathetic thing. Just drop it. Just drop it. If you don't have enough background on a given story, President Trump violates separation of church and state by attending church at St. John's Lafayette Square. Okay, nobody said that. I'm using this as an example of the way these things work. Okay, my dear morons, every president since I think Jefferson has attended services at St. John's Lafayette Square. That's why it's called the Church of the Presidents. So if you're going to attack someone for something, do your research first, have a little background, because of course if you don't, then you say stupid stuff.
An important question just popped into my head today, and I don't know.
That's always a mistake. Go ahead.
Would you ever, on stream or perhaps in real life, could I ever get you to wear a MAGA hat?
No.
Not necessarily to endorse Trump, but to troll old liberals.
No.
Why not?
I'm not going to wear a baseball cap.
Is that well, okay? What if we got like a straw hat that says "Make America Great Again"?
That's hard.
Wow.
I mean, you see, the thing is, my problem. I'll be frank. I mean, obviously, I'd love America to be great, It's the again part I have trouble with.
Why?
Because it's implying, I mean, look, I mourn the country that I was born in very much. The land of Irving Berlin and Norman Rockwell, of Halloween trick-or-treating and Boy Scouts and the American Legion, and I miss all that. You bet. But it was in itself not all that great. It was the secondary, or maybe even the primary stage of the disease we're in now. All of the implicits that have brought us where we are were there. I'm not.
Isn't that a logical fallacy though? Because there's so I just was looking up logical fallacies, and one of the logical fallacies is if a solution isn't perfect, it must be discarded.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, because the problem is it wasn't a solution. It led us to exactly where we are for very good reasons, for inherent reasons. I mean, basically, look, just to give you one example, one of the things I loved reading were the religion sections of newspapers. But most of them had an interesting phrase, and this epitomized the religiosity, the general public religiosity of my childhood. And what was that? Worship at the church of your choice. Of course, the joke at the time was that if I was going to start a religion, I'd call it the church of your choice, so I'd get free advertising for every paper in the country. But that whole concept underlay Americanism, quote unquote. It's not that it wasn't perfect, it's that it was on the road to where we are now. Or to put this another way, if I took a wrong turn on Highway 17 that led me through Boxborough and then brought me back here, going back to Boxborough is not the solution. Going back to Highway 17 is the solution. Going back to Boxborough puts me closer on the right path. That's something. But figuring that all I have to do is go to Boxborough and I'll be fine, it's not going to get me back on Highway 17. And we took that wrong turn a long, long time ago. Before we can even have a solution, we have to recognize that there's a problem. But Mr. Trump, what does making America great again mean? He's not going to get rid of gay marriage. He said as much. It's the law of the land, he says. He's not going to do anything in terms of an executive set-aside or anything about Roe v. Wade. We're going to have to hope Kavanaugh, et cetera, do something. And, with the tick of the clock, the closer we get to the election, the less likely it is that Roe v. Wade will go down. And if we get to the election without it having gone down, I doubt it will under the Trumpster. So that's my problem. Wearing that particular thing would imply that I think that Mr. Trump is going to make America great again. And I do not think he is.
But so for you individually, you don't want. What I'm taking exception to is the fact that you seem to say that a retracement to perhaps the 40s or 50s is not sufficient.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, then why do you dress like that?
That's all I know.
Exactly. So why can't we do it?
It's not enough. You see, I saw the way.
Isn't that hypocritical though?
Hardly.
Because what you're saying your dress is actually not enough. What you do in terms of dress.
I don't wear a dress.
No,
I don't wear a dress.
No, in terms of how you dress.
Of course, it's not enough. It's never enough.
So what's the ideal?
The ideal? I tell you honestly, once the first principles are achieved, then lesser things like dress, etc., will go to precisely where they need to be. I use the best I know in lesser things because that's all I know. But until the first principles, the erroneous principles underlying our national life are addressed, there won't be any great improvement. And mind you,
I don't see how that retracement is possible.
uh, well, let's put it this way. Sooner or later, it will have to happen. The
I,
question is what's going to be
I
left
mean, for
when it
example, like
does.
how can you get people onto something like monarchy and authority when we can't even figure gender out?
Well, the answer is very simple. At some point, sooner or later, reality will reassert itself. Now, the problem is at what point? In other words, the whole gender thing is severely damaging society's very capability to function at all. I mean, you take another 3 or 4 generations in this direction, if that's even possible, and the thing will collapse of its own weight. It'll be reduced to the very bare essentials. I mean, dressing like the 50s, you'll be lucky to have anybody dressing at all in anything. And then things eventually, reality will reassert itself. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Take Catholics your age. Now, back in the 60s, Vatican II came along, and then in the aftermath, they got rid of the Latin Mass. They got rid of monstrances. You never had benediction anymore. You didn't have adoration. You didn't have, you had guitars. You had no Gregorian chant. It was all gone. Poof. As though it had never existed in a very short time. But what happened is that with the passage of time, it didn't work. Their new thing, although they're still trying to push it just didn't work. And younger people who had no remembrance of either the before time or the revolution, in them, reality reasserted itself. If you really believe that that bread and wine is really and truly Jesus Christ, you will naturally, unless you've been warped, you will naturally react in certain ways. So too, with the whole gender confusion thing. It will go down a certain course, and society will collapse at a certain rate. Depending on how far down it goes, sooner or later, at some point, our descendants will rediscover reality. Because just as if you really believe the bread and wine is Jesus Christ himself, so too, if you really want to have a family, if you really want to keep a woman, if you really want to raise children, there's certain things you really have to do. You just have to. And if the structure of society is so broken that you really have to rely on yourself and on the people around you, there's no greater authority to help you out to keep the drug going, well, then people will rediscover the family again. People will rediscover just through normal living that they have to band together. The community is important because if you don't have it, you'll get picked off by other people. If you don't have people organizing, then what happens is you've just got the rule of the mighty. And I mean literally tooth and claw. God forbid we should ever get down that low. But sooner or later, at some point between where we are now and the total reduction that I describe, sooner or later, people will figure things out and they'll begin to rebuild. Of course, that also is leaving out what might come in from outside. If the Latin Americans suddenly figure themselves out, if the Africans continue to convert at a huge rate, it's hard to tell. I mean, it's quite possible that the world in 500 or 1,000 years will be completely unrecognizable to us. All of Rome would have been unrecognizable to the Romans. There was a society that had to go all the way down to the bottom before they could pick themselves up again. And that picking up took a long time. But there were people toward the end of Rome who were having the same conversation we're having. Why can't we return to the old Roman virtues? Well, because the Roman Republic was pagan, and because those virtues, while they were better than what replaced them, were not self-sustaining. Unfortunately, we're also talking in longer terms than a single lifetime.
I agree with you in a sense. Like, uh, I hear what you're saying. Like, it can't just simply be a retracement to 1930 because that 1930 society is still founded on Enlightenment principles, which are ethical principles that, without using God as a basis,
No.
and it will inherently decay again. But I guess what I'm just looking for is something actionable for
Oh,
people.
there's lots of stuff. Um, but you know, right now, I think I've told you this before, but I remember back about 10 years ago, I was having lunch with a French politician, a Catholic monarchist, and he asked me if I had any hope for the future. And I said, well, I do, but you got to bear in mind, looking again at history, we're not in a good position really to see what that hope is. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, let's pretend you and I with St. Ambrose and St. Augustine discussing the present state of the empire. Well, it doesn't look very good. And in fact, what we don't know is that you, St. Ambrose, are going to die after seeing one of your favorite emperors murdered. And I'm going to die while the Vandals are besieging my city. We don't know that. And you know the other thing we don't know? We don't know about Clovis. There's no way we could conceive of the baptism of Clovis and what that would mean for the faith and for Europe and for civilization. But had you, St. Ambrose, and I, St. Augustine, not done what we did, there would have been no Clovis. So you see, we did not succeed in saving the empire, at least not in the form that we wanted to save it in. But our work was not without fruit. And it bore fruit in ways that we simply couldn't imagine. They were totally beyond our ken. I mean, to give you another example, you've heard of Father Matteo Ricci, yeah? The
No.
Chinese Jesuit. The Chinese Jesuit, well, he wasn't Chinese, he was an Italian Jesuit, missionary in China in the 1500s. Now, I mention him because I had a friend, Dr. Jack Trop, who was a Jewish guy from New York and who was in the Army of Occupation in Japan after the war, stayed on after the occupation, brought his family over, went into import-export, and learned to read and write Japanese, Chinese, and Korean, which is interesting because they're not related to each other at all. They have some of the same characters, but that's about it. Anyway, he read the writings of Father Matteo Ricci in Chinese, and it converted him to Catholicism. So, Father Ricci wrote his apologetics to try to convert the imperial court at Peking. He failed. But he did convert a Jewish man 200 years later, a native of a country that didn't even exist when he was writing. He saved a soul, all right, but not anything like any one of the souls he had in mind.
I see.
You would like immediate gratification. So would we all. So would I. But life doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's like we would hope or wish for an organic tracement to the ideals, but life doesn't work that way.
Well, sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. I mean, one thing history teaches us is that almost anything can happen. In the larger scale, things do tend to follow certain patterns. But in the immediate, can go all sorts of ways. And one thing I should mention, though, while I'm thinking about it, about Dr. Trop, just because I feel like mentioning it. When he died, we oddly enough had to bury him. And this was at a cemetery there in Los Angeles. It was in January. He died on the Epiphany and buried him about a week later. So there we are at the graveyard. It was, you know how it can get in January in California, very misty and rainy and dreary, clouds, real socked in. Perfect for an interment. If you were doing a movie, this would be just the atmosphere you'd want, right? But keep that in mind, though. because the priest got to the point about eternal rest granted to him, O Lord, and that light perpetual shine upon him. He got to those very words, and the clouds broke, and a single ray of sunlight went down, zip, illumined the coffin, and nothing else. And then the priest read the prayers, and it closed off. And afterward, we were all like, whoa. And afterwards, I went up to the priest, and I said, Father, that was great. You keep that in. You're going to be the funeral giver to the stars. You'll see. Bill, I mean, it was a very eerie thing. And the fact that he had been converted by reading Matteo Ricci in Chinese, that's one of the weird stories that makes life worth living, if you see what I mean.
That's a bit much.
The weird isn't all I thought so. I thought it was a lot. I mean, clear as day, I can remember the bunch of us all just staring at each other. What? It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Wow. Okay.
But life is Lovecraftian, all right, but it isn't all about Cthulhu.
Wow.
Sometimes the good does break through from the outside.
Wow, this was quite a long... I have no idea how we touched all these things. When the initial question was just asking what sources do you use for news. Okay,
Let's move on.
I like when we do that, though. That means we have a good show.
Okay. So does the audience, apparently.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, next question is from Matthew.
Okay.
I'm loving the content. Keep up the great work. Your show has managed to turn this Irish Republican into an Irish monarchist, much to the horror of my family. Just like Gandalf was in the Shire, Charles will soon be labeled a, quote, disturber of the peace. I was recently reading about the Holy Roman Empire and discovered that the Holy Roman Emperor was not initially a hereditary title, but was an elected office chosen by 7 electors that could pass between the princely houses of Europe. Yet for the past few hundred years, the title was held by the Habsburgs. It seems strange to me that the electors would allow their influence in choosing the emperor to be extinguished and for so much power to be concentrated in one royal house. Will Charles please explain how the Holy Roman Emperor became a hereditary title passed down the Habsburgs line only? A second question I have is, who are Charles's top 5 Habsburgs and why? Thanks and God bless from your fellow LARPer.
All right, very good. Well, first, God save Ireland, cried the heroes. God save Ireland, cried them all. Whether on the scaffold high or the battlefield we die, oh, what matter, for Ireland we fall. So there you go, a little bit of Irish patriotism for you. Well, what happened basically was that although it was elective, it was generally, and this was very typical of the Germanic tribes, it was elected within a single family. So Otto the Great, who was the first of the Saxons, he was his family ruled. They kept getting elected until they died out, and that's what kept happening. Now, this was not the direct constitution, and in fact, when the family of Hohenstaufen died out, they had what was called the Great Interregnum, and the electors fought. They broke into 2 camps, and one group elected Richard of Cornwall, another elected Alfonso of Castile, neither of whom were in a position to do much about the empire. And so for a good, I forget how long it lasted, but it was a good 20 years at least, I think. It was just a mess. Robber barons everywhere, terrible. So in 1276, Rudolph of Habsburg was elected emperor, the first Habsburg. But after him, they had a number of people from other houses, the Luxembourgs, the Wittelsbachs, and all that. It was only toward the very end of the 1400s that it got settled in the Habsburgs kind of permanently. There were a number of reasons why this was. Firstly, they had pretty much married out the Luxembourgs and people like that. Number two, one of the big things of the Holy Roman Emperor was to defend Europe against the Muslim threat. Well, who was in the best position to do that? The Habsburgs, who lay right athwart the Muslim line of advance through Hungary and so on. The last serious challenge to Habsburg monopoly of the throne, of the imperial throne, was the election of 1517, when Charles I of Spain ran against two other candidates, Francis I of France and Henry VIII of England. Be kind of a funny thing if Henry VIII had been elected emperor. But he wasn't, and neither was Francis. Charles I of Spain was the favored individual. He was already the ruler of the Netherlands and Burgundy and all that, and of Austria. He had inherited. I mean, you had this weird combination of things because his grandfather, the Emperor Maximilian, had married a lady called Mary of Burgundy. So with the Austrian lands, he suddenly had Belgium and what's now a chunk of eastern France and Holland and all that. His son, Philip of Burgundy, married the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Christopher Columbus fame. She was named Juana la Loca, Juana the Crazy. So you had Philip the Handsome and Juana the Crazy. I'm sure we've all known couples who were like that. One of them very attractive, the other nuts. But at any rate, they married, and they produced Charles I. So, because of the conquest of Mexico and Peru, he became the first man upon whose empire the sun never set. But between fighting the Turks and the nascent Lutheran heresy and the French, it was just all too much, and he swore that would never happen to anyone else again. So he left the Austrian lands and thus the empire to his brother, and Spain and its territories to his son. That's why you had the Austrian and Spanish Habsburgs. All right. Well, from that time until the death of Charles VI, who was the last actual Habsburg male in the 1750s, they were all Habsburgs. But when he died, he was replaced by the Elector of Bavaria, who immediately declared war on Austria. It didn't go well. He had a 3-year-long disastrous reign and died. And after he died, he was replaced with the husband of Maria Theresia, Francis of Lorraine. And from that time until the end of the empire, they were Habsburgs. So it was a combination of things. It was an onerous responsibility, and the ruler who had it had to have enough in the way of hereditary lands to be able to support the job. And when a big part of the imperial office became fighting the Turks, there was nobody either geographically or financially in the position to do it the way the Habsburgs could and did. So I hope that answers the question.
I don't know if that's a pretty picture of monarchy you paint. Is this nepotism, monopoly, robber barons?
No, that's the lack of monarchy. That's where the robber barons came in.
But wasn't under, the Holy Roman Emperor's watch?
No, there was the interregnum. There was no emperor. That was the problem.
Oh, interesting.
And that one reason also why it was that experience, and as well as the weakness of the Polish monarchy when they became an elective monarchy, that kind of pushed everything in a hereditary direction as well. Because to be honest with you, with the exception of the papacy, elective monarchy is rarely as efficient or as well run as an hereditary monarchy. It just isn't. Anyway, at least that's what history shows. Now, to answer the question, my 5 favorite Habsburgs, that is hard. I've got a lot to choose from. But I would say they would be Charles V, whom I just mentioned, on whose empire the sun never set. The second would be Maria Theresia, because she held the family possessions together when everything fell to bits.
Is she the one that they treated like a man or something? What?
Yes, she was the one because her father was the last male Habsburg. So he ran around Europe and got everyone to sign what was called the Pragmatic Sanction, agreeing that she should succeed him. And then as soon as he was dead, everybody came out with the knives ready to carve up the empire. And so she turned for help to her Hungarian nobles. And there was a problem because it was against the Hungarian law for a woman to inherit the throne. But she stood before them with her infant son in her arms, appealing for their assistance and being very gallant and wild Hungarians. They drew their swords and said, "Long live Maria Theresia, our king." They voted her a man.
There you
Now,
go.
mind you, she is not the only beneficiary of that kind of thing. In certain areas, Queen Elizabeth II is also a man. In Jersey and Guernsey, she is the Duke of Normandy. In Lancashire, she is the Duke of Lancaster. And on the Isle of Man, she is the Lord of Man. So, what was good enough for Maria Theresia is good enough for Elizabeth II. So there.
Okay, so what is that, 2 or 3 Habsburgs?
That's 2.
Okay.
A third Habsburg would have to be the inimitable Franz Josef, just because he was there for so long and was the picture of the monarchy for so many people. I mean, he was like Queen Elizabeth or Queen Victoria. He was there forever. I would say Franz Ferdinand, the murdered Archduke, who I've really, in writing my book on Kaiser Karl, I've really gotten to know him a lot better than I did. And what a tremendous loss for both the empire and the world. It would have been a much better place if he had lived and succeeded his uncle. And last is Blessed Emperor Charles himself. He, about whom I wrote the book, he was an amazing man and a real patron for our time, for a number of reasons. Everything around him collapsed, but he kept steady. You know, he kept true to the faith. He kept true to his ideals, both religious and political, despite being betrayed constantly and everything falling apart around him. He was a tremendous patron for fathers, because he never despaired. His children's education was always one of his major interests. He's a great patron for husbands for the same reason. But he also, and this hit me like a ton of bricks when I was finishing the book, he also is a great patron for children from broken or difficult homes, because his parents were very badly matched. His father was kind of a ne'er-do-well, died of syphilis. His mother was sort of a very religious individual, but kind of dour. And yet, not only did he stay on really good terms with both of them, he picked up the best from each of them. So from his father, he got his wild sense of humor, his easy way of dealing with people, his charm. He got all that from his dad, but not the promiscuity. From his mother, he got the deep piety and the real heavy sense of right and wrong, but not the dourness, not the heaviness. So, and that stood him in good stead, having to work between his great uncle Franz Josef and his uncle Franz Ferdinand. There were a lot of problems between them. He stayed on good terms with both of them and dealt well with both of them. So he's a really, really good patron for people in that position too. If you come from a broken home, or your parents were somewhat less than you would have liked, Kaiser Karl is a tremendous patron for you. Now, if I were allowed a sixth, I would say the Archduke Otto, Karl's son, whom I had the pleasure of knowing somewhat, and who honestly was the greatest emperor that Austria never had. He was by far the best educated. Personally, like his father, very, very brave. Again, a tragedy for the world that he didn't reign, just as it was a tragedy for the world that his father did not stand on the throne. I don't just say Austria, I say the world. So, there you go.
Okay. Why do you think the Catholic Church got this strange reputation of being so prudish, given that the most Catholic cultures in Europe are also known for being the most romantic?
Well, partly because when people want to look down on you, they'll do whatever they can. And you'll always know that because their criticisms cancel each other out. Your problem is you're too puritanical. Well, yeah, but I drink and I've got 12 children. Well, that's it exactly. You see, you just let yourself go. You're only thinking about pleasure. Well, which is it? Well, it's both and it's neither. I just don't like you. That's part of it. Part of it was the Irish in America
Whoa,
who
bagging on the
were
Irish. Wow, why are you so harsh
bagging
on
on
the
the Irish.
Irish?
Well, a couple of reasons, not beyond their control. You see, unfortunately, most of the Irish lost the Gaelic in Ireland. And even over there, they felt the need to conform somehow to Anglo-Morites. This was reinforced by a touch of Jansenism in the Irish church. And so when they got here, they wanted to be respectable, and to be respectable meant being like Puritans. This was particularly true in New England. But mind you, even in New England, I mean, you've got the Kennedys who made such a big thing of trying to appear respectable on Anglo terms, and yet were the most.
Aren't you doing the exact thing of your satire where you just call them puritanical, but then they have like 12 kids, and they're drinking
exactly.
all the time. So
except with
so
the
you
Kennedys,
just proved that you hate the Irish.
I don't hate the Irish.
You just did the satire of the guy saying, clean up your life, and then you're also puritanical, and you just did that for the Irish.
But they like it. The Irish like that. They enjoy being accused of Puritanism and being accused of being drunks. At the same time.
You really don't like the Irish. I'm just, my mouth is open because
I love the Irish.
But you just criticize them for being both puritanical and just unruly.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? I think it's a wonderful way to be.
Isn't that a contradiction? Aren't you inherently contradicting yourself?
No, not at all. I'm accepting them for who they are.
Wow. Well,
no, seriously. The truth is that that there was an element amongst the Irish, usually the nuns, that gave them the reputation for being very stern and nasty. And similarly, there was an element among the Irish that laity that felt they had to appear very, very puritanical in order to live down the example of their fellow Irish. Have you ever heard of the phrases lace curtain and shanty?
Lace curtain is a Boston term, is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean primarily, but they have it elsewhere. The idea is that lace curtain Irish were the real gentlemen, the gentry, don't you know, that lived up to the high standards expected by their wasp neighbors. Whereas the shanty were the wild swillers, the unruly types. Well, my I asked Cardinal McIntyre, who was as Irish as they come, I said, well, what did you think of the Kennedys? And he, referring to Rose Fitzgerald marrying Joseph Kennedy, said, well, that's what you get when lace curtain marries shanty. Which, of course, he was New York Irish, so I guess they have their own rivalries, New York versus Boston. I don't know. Every group, I don't care who they are, they have their own internal rivalries and factionalism, which if you're not part of it, you're like, well, okay. And you'll hear them make snide comments, and you know they're snide, but you don't quite know how. You know what I'm saying?
Got it. Yeah, I've seen that.
And obviously, if you were one of the other people, you'd really hit it. It'd really hit you. But you're not. So you're like, I don't think that was meant to be nice. But you can't put your finger on it. I mean, I had this once with a couple of friends of mine in Akron, Akron, Ohio. We went to go see the first Mormon temple in America, but it's controlled by what was called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who were a breakaway group from the church in Salt Lake City. So the tour guide was in the Reorganized Church, and most of the other tourists on the thing were Mormons from Utah. And there were us 4 Catholics. So we could tell that the docent was making snide comments to them, and they were making them back, except we couldn't tell how.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I could say, yeah, and of course here we see this and such. Now you'll have read whatnot in the Simonson book. He's wrong, of course. They're like, and we could tell there was something going on, but we couldn't tell what.
Yeah.
We could just tell that they were throwing rocks at each other. Well, that's how it is, I expect, when New York versus Boston Irish, But again, I'm not the best expert.
Okay. Oh.
Doesn't keep me from laughing.
I'm gonna leave you to the wolves in the comments. All the Irishmen are gonna come after you in the comments on this one, and I won't feel the least bit bad.
Yes, you will. You'll be weeping on the inside. You know you will.
Now, there's a certain, I think, camaraderie between the Irish people and the Italian people, especially, compared to the French.
Not in Boston, there wasn't. The Irish couldn't stand the Italians.
Well, familiarity breeds contempt.
They couldn't stand the French. They couldn't stand the Italians.
Well, Italians can't stand Italians, and Irish can't stand Irish. So there you go.
Well, that's for sure.
So what are we talking about here?
I don't know, but I mean, there was a lot of rivalry. I told you the story of my my dad in the Irish parish when he was a little boy.
Probably, but say it again.
Well, it is kind of funny. Basically, when my grandfather died back in 1933, my father's father, typical Coulombe, made a lot of money, spent a lot of money, lived large, but when he died, there wasn't much to show for it, except a big house on Water Street, a whaling mansion, which Water Street was not the North End, which was the French ghetto. It was where the Irish and Yankees lived. So to go to Mass every Sunday, they used to drive when my grandfather was alive. They'd take the car, gave up the car, and they had to take the streetcar. And they'd go down to North End to the church called Sacré-Cœur, Sacred Heart. Well, as luck would have it, one Sunday they missed the streetcar. So my grandmother, my father, and my aunt had to go to the Irish church where they had never been. And they sat in the front row. In the midst of his sermon, the priest looked at them and he said, "Why don't your people go back where you belong?" Well, they were somewhat taken aback by this, but my grandmother was really unflappable, and she spoke English quite as well as she spoke French. So as they're filing out, Mamie turns to him and says, "I am so terribly sorry, Father. I hadn't realized that this was an Episcopal church." A big smile. But my father said that the priest was so angry he turned bright red and couldn't speak. And then they just walked out.
And your family never forgave the Irish again.
No, that's not true.
The French know how to hold a grudge.
That's not true.
There you go. That is 100% true.
Listen,
and you paid it back from then on.
That's not true. The priest that baptized my brother Andre. All right, now here's an example of why. Let me show you why you're wrong, okay?
I hit a nerve on this one.
Well, it's just you need to understand how wrong you are. So the priest was an Irishman from the old sod. And I wasn't around for this because I'm 7 years younger. But there they are at the baptismal font. And the priest says to my dad, "And what shall the child be called?" And my dad said, "Andre." "You mean Andrew?" No, actually, I don't, Father. I mean Andre. In English, it's Andrew. My father said, yes, I'm aware of that, Father. And in French, it's Andre. And we are French, so it will be Andre. And he says, now bear in mind, this is less than 10 years after my dad got out of being a tail gunner against the Japs for the great old Stars and Stripes. So the priest says, you're an American now, and it's and it's Andrew. Well, that was all Dad had to hear. And he said, listen, you, I fought in the war against the Japanese for this bloody country. Don't you tell me, you bloody immigrant. Well, he very annoyedly baptized him Andre. So you see, you're wrong.
No, I'm actually right because, and the proof is in the pudding. You give, you tell these stories and you give these priests thick Irish accents all the time.
Because they have them.
No, actually they don't. Father Callanan, the story that you tell of Father Callanan, who I know, he speaks perfectly normal, and you've given him this thick, annoying Irish
He has
accent.
a big brogue.
No, not at all. Actually, not
he
at all.
does too. Have we spoken about? Well, you know.
Not at all. Not at all. And
That's
I went to an
exactly
all
what I
boy.
heard.
No.
All
no,
3 times.
Not at all.
And I tell you, the man is definitely missing a few whatnots. He's not just Irish. He's obsessed. You know what I mean? He's obsessed.
I know what you mean, but he just doesn't have that accent. And
ask your brother.
And it brings into mind that you cast all Irish in a certain light, and I wonder if it's a true light.
Well, number one, that's not true. Some of my dearest friends in the world are Irish. I have a chunk of Irish blood myself. Number one. Number two, let's not forget, I've traveled extensively through the Emerald Isle. I had a great time there.
Cool.
Number three, let's not forget something else. Only 33% voted against abortion at the referendum.
Wow, here it comes. There it is. There it is.
Well, to be fair, though, and I'm nothing if not fair, the North was virulently anti-abortion, what with being Protestant and all, but not just the Protestants of the North, the Catholic well. And it took Parliament, the British Parliament, which are unable to get themselves together about Brexit, was somehow able to pull their rears together to push abortion on the Northern Irish population. This, you're talking about fiddling while Rome burns. This is just amazing to me that they did this. This is in July. And they're yapping about, there's paralysis, there's gridlock, there's this, there's that. But we can put together a majority to shove it down the throats of Northern Ireland. But that will be Ulster's unending claim to pride, that where Southern Ireland embraced both gay marriage and abortion in a referendum, Ulster had to have it shoved down their throats by Parliament. And I have to admit, too, that one of the, although I'm not a great fan of my fellow New Yorker, Eamon de Valera, I am a great fan of Michael Collins. And I have a certain respect for the men of 16, like Patrick Pearse. But the creature that is now the Taoiseach of Ireland, the gay Pakistani fellow, I can't stand to hear the Irish talking about oppression when they've created what they live in now. I can't stand it. It was one thing when they were still a Catholic country. I loved the old national songs. I know them all. And they're great songs. And in that time, it was great to sing them. But now it's like a mockery. No, the truth is I don't hate Ireland at all. I love Ireland. I love it very much. I'm just horrified by what it's become. Corruptio optima pessime. The corruption of the best is the worst, and God have they proved it. And part of it, too, is that I saw the same thing with the French Canadians, the Quiet Revolution, the Revolution Tranquille, turned my people from the most Catholic people in North America to scum. It's amazing. It's one of the great tragedies of my life, to be honest with you. You can't spend all your time crying over it, but if I could, I would. To see what we were and to see what we've become, I could never have the disdain for the Irish that I have for my own. Just not possible. I think if I were Italian, I'd feel the same about Italy. But Hungary and Slovakia are doing real great right now.
Yeah, so there's that.
Always look at the bright side. That's one reason why I'm very happy to be over here right now, to be honest with you. It's wonderful to be right next door to countries that are getting their heads out, as opposed to shoving them ever further in.
Yeah, it's nice to run from the cross.
Okay. Oh, well played. Just like my brother Andre would do. Very good.
No, path of least resistance, absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to pull yourself out of the fray in order to prepare to re-enter it.
What a bunch of crap.
Tell it St. Benedict, smart guy. You remember St. Benedict?
Are you sure that's a correct application of St. Benedict?
Why not?
Okay.
Anyway, I'm trying to give you a compliment. You should be proud of your mother's people, and I get guff. Well, that's the last time I try to give you a compliment.
Okay.
The next time you want a compliment from me, pal, you go to the 13th floor and see what's waiting.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Man.
All right. Next question. Was the day of the Sabbath moved by Emperor Constantine? Should we be keeping Saturday holy?
No. It was the Sabbath was moved to Saturday by Ellen White, who was crazy. Founders of the Seventh-day Adventists, just so you know.
Oh.
No, it was moved in apostolic times because our Lord arose on a Sunday. It is that simple. The earliest accounts of the liturgy we have, the Didache and things like that, it's all Sunday. So,
where do you think this question is coming from? Why is he asking this?
I don't know. I mean, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Seventh-day Baptists, and people like that, and various other Judaizing cults really early on, all made the same claim: we should be doing the Jewish Sabbath. But, and he may have a background on that, or he may have encountered a Seventh-day Adventist to ask him those questions. I don't know.
I hear a lot about witches doing black masses. Are they a real thing? What do those masses actually look like?
Oof. Well, I've never actually been to a black mass, although I've been to several Novus Ordo masses that made me wonder if they were trying.
Are witches satanic per se?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a witch.
Yeah.
You see, here's where you get into questions of semantics.
Yeah.
Firstly, you've got to understand that the people we call witches today, the Wicca folk, are not at all like the witches of the Middle Ages. Now, they'd like to claim to be. They have these long, drawn-out genealogies of sorts that would link themselves up with it, but there's no truth to it. The fact is that Wicca is an age-old religion that goes all the way back to the 1920s. The idea of it was founded by a woman named Margaret Murray in a book she wrote called The Witch Cult in Western Europe, in which she claimed that the people whom the church, and presumably the Jews before them, remember, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, is in the Old Testament. Her claim was that these were really simply the survivors of pagan religions, and that these had been, retained until our own day. And then in the 1940s, a gentleman named Gerald Gardner, uh, with the help of various other people, invented some rituals for this religion. And it's, taken off since then. It's got nothing to do with the witchcraft of the Middle Ages. It's a recent invention. Now, as far as the witchcraft of the Middle Ages goes, what was that? Well, I'll tell you. The Wiccan folk would like to say that it was the invention of Christianity. No, that's not true. As I say, the first anti-witchcraft laws come from the Old Testament. That is the first ones we have. So the Jews knew about witchcraft. Most pagan societies believe in witchcraft and punish the practitioners.
A
To
witch in
this
the
day,
Bible.
what's that?
Isn't there a witch in the Bible? In the
The
Old
Witch of
Testament?
Endor.
Yeah.
The Witch of Endor. Although she doesn't get punished. She just does her thing. Conjures Samuel. But in China and in Africa today, in pagan areas, people still get routinely murdered for being accused of witchcraft. So the question is, what do all these accounts of witches, Christian, Jewish, and non-Christian, have in common? The idea that a person renders homage to whatever that given faith or society believe is the height of spiritual evil or the depth of spiritual evil, i.e., a demonic figure, in return for some kind of power. That is what the witch of the Middle Ages was. That is what the witches today in various pagan countries are claimed to be. So all of these, all of that having been said, what is the Black Mass? Well, the Black Mass is the major form of worship of the devil that Satanists and the medieval witches, who were the equivalent of Satanists, not of our Wiccan friends, that's a major worship service. And what is it? Well, again, there are various accounts of it. I've never been to one, I repeat. But as I understand it, it involves the profanation of a valid host, either a stolen one or a black mass said by an actual priest in valid orders who brings Christ down on the altar in order to blaspheme him, to profane him. Some folk use a naked woman as the altar, others don't. And it's intended to blaspheme our Lord. But the central part of it involves the use of a valid host. And one of the reasons why communion in the hand was seen as such a problem is that it does make it easier for people to steal hosts.
Yeah, Taylor Marshall posted a video of this, I think, and I just couldn't even watch the video of this guy snatching it. Oh my gosh.
It's a horrible thing. And I mean, I've seen in one case, I saw a priest stop a person who had apparently, you know, not consumed the host
Yeah.
and took it back from him. So, uh, I mean, these things are horrific.
They are.
But again, that's not Wiccans. Wiccans, as I say, imagine that they're carrying on some sort of pre-Christian European paganism, which is primarily invented. And one of the things they'll do is that they'll take Christian, or as you might say, folk Christian practices that they presume must come down from before Christianity and try to repaganize them, if you see what I mean. So they'll celebrate Christmas as Yule, and they'll, see the fir tree as a symbol of Odin or whatever, that kind of stuff.
To me, these are all just versions of demon worship. But also, people get fascinated with, like, satanic stuff. By the way,
See,
shout out to TFP. Thank you for the TFP because they always rally people to counter these black masses that we hear about. They did one in Oklahoma. I think they did one in New England. Thank
well,
y'all for TFP. Yeah, you
I
were
was
there for
in
that
on the
one.
New England deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the Harvard
and
one. The Harvard one. Yeah.
the Harvard one, and I got to tell you though, it was a wonderful experience. I didn't go to the Black Mass, which ended up not really happening, but first the Eucharistic procession through the streets of Cambridge. That's something I will never forget. People dropping to their knees, cars honking, and then when we got there, 1,000 people were in that procession. And we go into the Church of St. Paul in Harvard Square, and the square, I literally had not seen it that crowded, that crammed with Eucharistic adorers. I had not seen it that crammed since the Vietnam War. And we went into the St. Paul's Church, which can only hold normally 1,000 people. It was already full. So we jammed it with double the people supposed to be in there for a holy hour of adoration and
Reparation.
reparation for what was supposedly going on. And the funny thing was that the then pastor is a friend of mine, Father Dre. Things had worked out over the course of the day that the president of Harvard felt obligated to attend the holy hour, and with her, the pastorate of the Harvard Memorial Church. Unfortunately, and this is sheer coinkydink, the name of the president was Dr. Faust.
Of course.
You can't make
You
this
can't
stuff
make.
up.
Yeah.
But my joke at the time was that while Dr. Faust was ready to comment, Dean Mephisto could not be reached. He'd vanished in a puff of smoke.
But it's things like this that give me hope to see Catholics in action, actually doing stuff, getting off the couch,
Yeah.
getting into the church, taking action, going to the streets.
Well, see, the thing was that leadership was provided. Father Dre and the other chaplains, both at Harvard and MIT and the surrounding schools, they coordinated this thing beautifully. And I have to say, he did a wonderful job in that he moved the administration to do something without confronting them. And then, I mean, it was very politic. And then he gave a rip-roaring sermon on the Eucharist and Satan and evil, which President Faust and the Reverend, whoever she was, had to sit through. They had no choice. They had to hear the whole thing. And, it was brilliantly done. If ever the church regains leadership, we will have a mighty force. When we have bishops who are willing to be bishops, when we have hierarchs who are willing to stand up against the forces of this world, then you'll see something. I remember when I was covering the protests regarding the cathedral in Los Angeles in 2002. You had a lot of anti-cathedral protesters who were extremely varied bunch of people. I mean, they could have been, some of them were traditionalist Catholics who didn't like it because it was ugly. Some of them were Protestants who didn't think we should have a cathedral. Some of them were Catholic worker types who thought the money was being wasted and we should just use St. Vincent's. I mean, any number of different people opposed it. The people that interested me were the folks protesting for it. These were almost all Hispanics who had been bussed in from their parishes by the church, being told that the anti-protesters were attacking the church and that they were needed to defend the faith. They turned out in droves. And I thought to myself, if we had a Catholic archbishop here who wasn't using them just for his own aggrandizement, it would be wonderful. I mean, you could imagine such a prelate saying to the governor of California, Your Excellency, until your views on abortion are more consonant with those of the majority of my flock, it probably would be unwise for you to appear publicly in Los Angeles. What with the demonstrations that are likely to break out? Yes, if I were you, I'd stay in Sacramento. LA really isn't the place for you, Your Excellency.
That would be so cool.
And it wouldn't be hard to do.
Your LA privileges are cut, Gruesome Newsome.
Time to stay in the Bay Area. You're not really needed down
Wow,
here.
that would be. I'm gonna pray for that. I'm gonna pray for. I'm gonna go to. I'm gonna go to adoration today. I'm gonna pray that Archbishop Gomez does that.
He if he chooses to use it. Now, mind you, Newsom would appeal to the Pope, so he'd probably get punished the way Cardinal Mahoney did. But the church is getting involved in politics. Ooh, as though Catholics somehow don't live in the world. As though the murder of infants is okay. Yes, I know, Governor Newsom. It's a pity your parents didn't feel the way you do. Life would be a different place. But at any rate, that was what hit me. That if we had that kind of leadership in the church, it'd be a different world. It'd be a different world. And I saw it that day in 2002. And I saw it in the streets of Cambridge. The faith is far from dead, but ours is an hierarchical faith. And although all of us have to do our very best where we are, no doubt about it, we double our own personal efforts, we double the efforts of the friends we have and the groups we're in. All true. But at the end of the day, as an hierarchical church, the responsibility for leading us is with the hierarchy. If they're going to be hirelings rather than shepherds, we all suffer. But sooner or later, that will come to an end, simply because the supply of hirelings will run out. You know the thing about hirelings, they generally go where the gravy is.
Yeah. So, okay. So when the gravy runs out.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's going to be very unfortunate for the rest of us. But what are you going to do?
Okay, question is from Brian. I'd like Charles to give his thoughts on how the theory of Darwinian evolution has led to so many of the errors, like societal acceptance of homosexuality, transgenderism, population control, contraception, abortion, and so many others we see today.
Well, that's a very good question. How to answer it simply. Well, in a nutshell, what Darwin did was, and again, whether or not he wanted to do this, that's another debate that people have gone backwards and forwards on. What his views had the effect of doing was to destroy the concept of man as a special creation of God and reduce him to being another animal like the others. Now, mind you, there's in a sense, philosophically, we've always said man is a rational animal. It's his reason that makes him different from the others. But what evolution basically said was that even reason was simply a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
That was, in a sense, illusory. And that man is an animal like all the others. Already by the time of the late 19th century, the build-up to the First World War, you had what was called social Darwinism, which held that man really ought to use his knowledge basically to breed the human race the way we breed cattle. That was what the whole eugenics notion came out of. That was the first, the motive idea behind Planned Parenthood. So that is what really, on the one hand, Darwinian evolution began by, in the popular mind anyway, dethroning God, but it ended by dethroning man.
Sad.
Yeah, it is. It was a heavy ingredient in the disgusting stew we have today.
Yeah, if we were animals, sooner or later the government's going to treat you like it.
Well, indeed, and of course it's to their advantage to think of us this way, because after all, if we're animals, what the hey?
We're just economic cows to be milked. And when we're not useful anymore, just put us down.
Yep, hospice, euthanasia, and only the best of us can be allowed to be born, hence the lack of Down syndrome children in Iceland. We eliminate any defects before we enter the gene pool and before we enter the labor force. And then as soon as we're no longer useful, off we go.
Selective breeding.
Yeah. And selective removal, cropping the herd.
Yeah. Okay, last question today. Gosh, this has been a long episode, but we've done good long tangent. I've enjoyed it.
Me too.
All right, our last question is from Nick. Greetings, Charles and Vincent.
Hello.
I come from the puritanical land of New England, specifically from the Fall River, New Bedford area. I understand that you spent a great amount of time here as a child. I was hoping that you could tell us more about your time here. Also, do you have any advice on how to properly evangelize this area?
Well, yes, I do. Firstly, my great-grandfather came down to the New Bedford Fall River area back in the 1880s. And as soon as he decided that he was going to be staying and not going back home, he bought a family plot, which is where all of us have been buried since, and where I'll be buried, in Notre Dame Cemetery in Fall River. Noticeable because it's right by the Rhode Island line, and if you take the wrong turn, as I usually do, and I'm going to go visit it, you will end up by the only remaining S&H green stamp sign in captivity. The owner of that particular place, he says he's been asked to sell the sign 1 million times. He won't do it. I asked him, what would you do if someone showed up with 100 S&H green stamps books from 1966? Would you redeem them? And he said, of course I'd redeem them. I'm an S&H green stamp redemption center. So if you got them, you know where to go. But at any rate, so my grandparents, my dad's parents were both born in the New Bedford area, as was he. I had a lot of relatives there, most of whom are dead. And of course, my parents are now there permanently, as are my grandparents, my great-grandparents, a lot of great-aunts and uncles. None of them are leaving. And, it was an interesting town, ethnically very divided. French, Irish, Portuguese, Italians, Poles, Germans. They all had national parishes. It was also and remains the home of one of the greatest delicacies ever invented by the hand of man. I refer to that delicious, wonderful thing called the chow mein sandwich. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had a chow mein sandwich made only with the noodles produced at the local Chinese noodle factory, which are unlike any I've ever had anywhere else, then you haven't lived. And if you find chow mein sandwiches a bit too exotic for your taste, they also have chop suey sandwiches. I know what you're wondering. Of what does such a thing consist? I will tell you. You take a bowl, then you take the bottom half of a hamburger bun, you put it in the center of the bowl. And then, depending on whether it's a chop suey sandwich or a chicken or a chow mein sandwich, you take chow mein or chop suey, dump it in the bowl. Then you take the top half of the bun and you put it on top. And there you go. And it is wonderful. Absolutely brilliant. Delicious. New Bedford's great contribution to the history of mankind. Although there are other things. New Bedford was the setting for the wonderful novel Moby Dick. And so in the downtown New Bedford, you can still see the Seaman's Bethel with its tablets of the many, many fishermen who have died. Folk objected to the fact that Bristol County, which is New Bedford and Fall River, consistently voted Republican. So in the 60s, they threw the main freeway right through the center of town and destroyed all the beautiful old whaling mansions on Water Street, including my family's. And just absolutely devastated it. So the historic car of New Bedford is sort of cut off from the rest of the world by this highway. It was done on purpose. They could have easily put it around, but nope, nope, nope. Put it right through the center of town. It used to be, when I was little, you would look down these streets, these cobblestone streets, and they went all the way down to the wharfs on the river, on another river, the Buzzards Bay, rather. Well, and the Acushnet. Well, it was a beautiful thing, and now it's all destroyed.
I just clicked. That's it right there.
What's that?
Your Irish bias. It's the Kennedys. There it is, right there.
What? Because
Wow.
the Kennedys are garbage? I'm biased against the Irish?
That's right.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
It makes perfect sense. Wow. There it is. Okay, anyhow, continue.
Well, no, I mean, just because they're by and large a despicable race, the Kennedys, it doesn't mean they're bad people.
Got it.
I
yeah.
mean, let me tell you something. My dad's best friend, Eddie Denise, there's a name that our friend will know, was the DA of Bristol County, and so of Dukes County, which is Martha's Vineyard, when little Teddy Kennedy drove off the Chappaquiddick Bridge. Now, I don't want to tell you that my dad's ex-best friend took Kennedy money to shut down the investigation. I certainly can't prove that, and it would be libelous for me to say so. But here's what I can tell you. All of a sudden, Eddie had enough money to buy a hotel, a restaurant, and a radio station. And my father never spoke to him again. Oh, well. Fortunately, Teddy Kennedy survived. Well, you know the old joke, more Americans have died in Teddy Kennedy's car than in nuclear blasts. But that was a joke at the time. But seriously, I will say that almost secondhand, that town had a part of my formation. I mean, I never lived there. I certainly visited the place enough, and a lot of my relatives are from there. My father was very much shaped by New Bedford, no doubt about it. And I love going there now. I love going to the Whaling Museum and all that. I love Fall River, which is, sad places because they were a lot greater than they are now. When they were whaling ports, they were incredible. Now they're just sort of, dying industrial towns. But again, a big part of who I am. And certainly when I'm buried there, they're a big part of who I will be. It's kind of comforting. My dad used to say, whoever you marry, you can promise her real security. she knows where she'll be planted. But the people there, they're very down to earth, very difficult to get to know on a certain level, but once you know them, it's hard to find anybody better. Now, having said all of that, how to evangelize? Well, I'll tell you, a lot of the old parishes have been merged and destroyed in recent years. Sacré-Cœur, that we buried my dad from because it was the family parish, is now a parking lot, but a very prominent parking lot next to a credit union. However, it had been fairly uglified. It was not that great a thing in its last years. What is still with us, however, is the beautiful church of St. Anthony, St. Antoine, which, gorgeous, gorgeous church. And it was near demolition, but they got a very dynamic pastor about 20 years ago, cleaned the place up. It's in great shape, and they've had Tridentine Masses there, as I understand it. Fall River just closed the great Church of St. Anne, another French-Canadian shrine. One thing you find in New England is that very often there's a choice between a French church or an Irish church to be shut. Guess which one gets shut? Just thought I'd mention it. But fortunately, the Diocese of Fall River did something very nice. They gave St. Anne's to a preservation group who are trads. So they're saying the Tridentine Mass there now. in the lower church. The upper church has got to take a lot of repair work. And the problem is you have all these beautiful churches, French, Irish, Italian, Polish. They're beautiful, but very expensive to maintain. It could be done with proper, sized congregations. But people left the church in droves in that part of the world. So, how do you evangelize? The answer is very simple. You find a parish like St. Antoine or, St. Anne's. I think if I were living in that part of the world right now, I would see what I could do helping out at St. Anne's in Fall River in terms of raising money and so on and attracting people to the Mass there. If I've read the situation right, I may be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then I'm sure people will correct me happily. But this is what I think I've picked up from what's online. And ethnic festivals, always make sure that the religious element is first and foremost. I don't care if it's St. Patrick's Day or Our Lady of Czestochowa or the Blessing of the Fleet, whatever. Make sure that the social element, on the one hand, is kept, but on the other hand, does not overwhelm the religious element. And, St. New Bedford, Fall River, there's a lot of potential there. Again, it does come down to leadership. The faith is not entirely dead there. You'd think it, but it's not. So, I don't know what you are, my correspondent from the beautiful valley of the Acushnet, but whether you're Irish or French or Polish or Italian, be proud of your background. Do your best to re-Catholicize it. Popularize the Tridentine Mass wherever you can find it. And get involved in local stuff. Join the Knights of Columbus. Do whatever you can. There's such a magnificent past there, and it's really not that far away. It really isn't. It's in my living memory anyway, and I'm not even 60 yet. So, best of luck. I hope that when I'm laid to my rest, I hope that Fall River is the Catholic city it once was again. One of the leading French-Canadian, I forget his name, but he's a French-Canadian fellow in Fall River, founded one of the first Caisse Populaire, popular bank. He was a papal zouave. That was the kind of people they had running around there then. And you think of what the people that came to New Bedford from Portugal and France and Ireland and Italy and Poland and everything else endured to get there, and the kinds of lives they had to lead working in the mills and so forth, and yet put aside enough money to build those incredible churches. There's got to be some spark of that faith left in their descendants. I cannot believe it's entirely gone. They have to be reminded of it. It has to be woken up. It's a little bit, to use a Tolkien-esque comparison, it's a little bit like waking up the Ents. But if you can wake up the Ents, they will be heard. And not all the Sarumans and all the chanceries and all the state houses of the world will be able to withstand it.
I love that metaphor.
Me too.
Okay, time for the book. We have a very special book this time. We just ordered it. Just barely received it a couple of days ago. The Catechism of the Council of Trent.
But wasn't that outmoded? Wasn't that replaced?
No.
Good answer. No. Absolutely. No.
So, hardcover, very beautifully done, published by Baronius Press. highly recommend this press, by the way. Never had the chance to talk about them. They're very hardcore trad. You know you're a hardcore trad when you publish 10 different versions of the Dewey Rames Bible. Literally. 10 different. I'm not
Yeah.
joking. Baroniuspress.com. Check them out. But anyhow, so I've wanted to get the Catechism of the Council of Trent for probably over a year, actually. But it hasn't really been readily available. It's just been recently kind of popular, and I've delved a little bit into it. And there are some differences that really jump out at you compared to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. One of them, well, I'll show you. I'll show you some of these pages I've marked. Let's see here. Whoops. Nope. Here we go. Baptism made obligatory after Christ's resurrection. Doesn't really beat around the bush. There's very sharp, precise, clear language that communicates the fullness of the Catholic faith in this book. Do you have anything to say?
Well, yeah, there's another difference between the Catechism of Trent and the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and that is in the manner of its authority. Because most of the Catechism of Trent, not all of it, but almost all of it, most of it, the vast majority of it, are really just quotations from the conciliar definitions.
Right.
But the Catechism of the Catholic Church is a compendium of varying quotations, some of which, they come from differing levels of solemnity. And then some of them aren't quotes at all. It's just there with no attribution. Now, there's a similar work called the Compendium of the Social Teaching of the Church, which has an interesting caveat in its own foreword, which is that the documents quoted have varying levels of solemnity, and that has to be taken into account when evaluating them. Well, they don't say that in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, but it's true in the one, it's true in the other. Few of them have the same level of solemnity as the Council of Trent. Now, why do I mention this? Because you brought up baptism. The sad truth of the matter is that the Catechism of the Council of Trent is flatly contradicted by the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Don't take my word for it. Read them side by side. Now, what are we to make of this? Well, Catechism of Trent simply quotes the Council in this area. Catechism of the Catholic Church doesn't quote anybody. It just says what it says. And a catechism by itself has no real solemnity at all. So, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, where it repeats Trent, is infallible because it's repeating infallible teaching. That's an important thing to bear in mind, important distinction. It's like Humanae Vitae, the encyclical of Paul VI condemning artificial birth control. People would say, well, an encyclical is infallible. Very true. But you can repeat infallible teaching in it, if you see the distinction.
Right.
So if the Council of Trent, if the Catechism of Trent was just another catechism versus the Catechism of the Catholic Church on this or any other point, if they disagreed with each other, well, then you'd have to sort of shrug and say, well, who knows? You don't have to do that here because you're basically pitting an unsubstantiated, unattributed expression in a catechism against a quotation from a council of the Catholic Church, an ecumenical council, which is, it doesn't get more infallible than that when it's explicitly dogmatizing. So, if you're asked, I can't speak for anyone else, but for myself, if you demand of me, do you follow the Catechism of Trent on this point or the Catechism of the Catholic Church? I'd have to say the Catechism of Trent. Now, don't think though that means the Catechism of the Catholic Church is without value. It's not without value. It has a great deal of value. There are all sorts of useful things that are quoted in it from sources that we don't generally get, the Eastern Church and so on and so forth. It also addresses things that the Catechism of Trent does not address, and very often in a more or less authoritative manner. But inevitably, when the two disagree, the CCC's side is not authoritative at all.
Okay. One other.
Oh, so let me
Okay.
just say, in practical terms, I would make myself familiar with the Catechism of Trent first, and then go on to use the Catechism of the Catholic Church, using that of Trent as a corrective. In other words, where the Catechism of the Catholic Church either does not contradict that of Trent or deals with areas that Trent does not, it's great. So it's, again, I don't say throw it out, but I do say learn Trent first. The Trent Catechism has the very basic stuff every Catholic absolutely needs.
Well, one of the things that really jumped out at me in delving in this catechism is that it doesn't just spell things out clearly, concisely, sharply, but it actually makes recommendations of what the faithful should do. For example, it doesn't just say baptism is essential, important, and everything else, and then just leave you to do the math on it, on how to approach baptism and the execution of it. It actually makes recommendations for the faithful. Let's see here. Baptism
Yep.
of infants should not be delayed. Stop messing around. Pretend like baptizing your child is the most important thing you could possibly do for your child. Pretend. You know?
Yeah, and
done.
pretend that feeding him is also important. And imagine, that changing him is a good thing too.
So I like the recommend. I like that it spells it out for you that you should be treating it in this manner. So it's got a lot of useful things. Again, we've just received this, so I haven't been able to delve and examine it as much as I'd like for the show so far. But I can kind of tell that this is one of the most important tools you can have for the Catholic faith.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
If you don't have your faith wrapped up in a nice little tidy package and there's just some stuff hanging out and you need to look up some stuff, grab this book. Okay. I really do think the way it's outlined that you're going to find what you were looking for. So.
And as I say, you needn't throw out the CCC, but read this first. This is foundational.
We again, patrons, we need more patrons. We put out so much content today. We did a 40-minute pre-show. So
amazing.
So if somehow these 2 hours and 2 hours plus, it looks like this show, if somehow you're not satiated and you need more, become a patron. You get 40 more minutes this week.
40 extra minutes. Yeah. And mind you, not in the cheap seats you've been sitting in.
Yeah.
You'll get to go up to up front to the gentry seats. So unless you think we're holding on to anything.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, honestly, I want to thank you. I've gotten a number of notes on Facebook and other social media this week, and I know Don Vincenzo has as well. Thank you for the thank yous, ladies and gentlemen. This is kind of a lonely job in a way, because we're broadcasting this stuff out into the ether, and if anything we do is of assistance to you, well, the money's nice and all that, but that's why we're here, you see. and of course the entire Tumbler House Tower team. Well, perhaps not whatever's on the 13th floor, but everybody else. And of course ourselves. You're why we're here. God's been very good to Vinny and myself in terms of the opportunities to learn the faith that have been thrown our way. And the only reason why that's happened is so that we can share it. It's the only reason why it's been given you. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. And remember, we're entering into what is my favorite season of the year, autumn. So have a good time with it. Go in for those apples, the pumpkins, the pumpkin spice. Oh, golly, the cooling of the air. Or if you're living in LA, the sepia-toned light.
What did you say?
The sunlight. You know, you know what I mean, that odd glowing
For the
light.
sunset?
The sunlight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got you.
You know what I'm saying? It gets this sort of strange glow, like a sepia-tone photograph. And the sky turns that incredibly rich blue. We don't have the leaves in SoCal,
yeah.
but we do. It's not nothing.
Yeah.
But whatever you're doing for the autumn, even if you're in God help us Australia and you're actually in spring, enjoy it. God's given it to you. It's a tremendous gift. Now, but at any rate.
Okay, well, that'll do it. We'll see everyone next time.
If it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
And the soul you save
might be your own.
Take care, ladies and gents. Happy Michaelmas. It's coming.